All right.
Okay.
McPHL, you're on.
All right, Slim, we on.
Okay, all right. Good morning, everyone. Every day we rise is a great day to be alive. And welcome to the Seven Cities Forums of Hampton Road presents Portsmouth Coffee Talk with our hosts, Leah Dre Stith, Thomas the Colonel Chapman, and yours truly, James Slim Overton. Good morning, hosts.
Good morning, James.
Good morning, James.
And for those that are watching, Monday morning technology is hit us again, but we heard the Colonel. Oh, now we see the Colonel, okay.
Yes, good.
Leah, she's kind of caught up in the coffee talk sign there. She's there with us, so we're gonna want to thank everyone.
We're getting some feedback.
Watching, and we have our special guest with us, a no stranger to the Seven Cities Forums of Hampton Roads, Dr. Ernestine Duncan, professor of psychology at Norfolk State University. And Dr. Duncan has been with us or with me from the beginning in the old building on Church Street. And but it was a point she was coming on at least once a month because mental health is very important, and it's always something to discuss concerning that, especially when it concerns the African American community. But we have her on this week so we can discuss the aftermaths of the pandemic, and as things are opening up somewhat, and we're still sort of threatened by a variant. But we want to talk about, going forward, from the African American community and some of the effects that it maybe some long-term effects that it's had on our community. Good morning, Dr. Duncan, by the way. Oh, before I do that, Leah, did you have a student this week?
I did not, James, and I do apologize to you.
Okay, because we didn't know if we were going to have you, so we just wanted to make sure. We'll double up next week.
Yes, we will.
But good morning, Dr. Duncan.
Good morning. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Good morning,
Thank
Dr.
you for
Duncan.
coming.
Good morning. Good morning.
Morning.
And
For coming
unfortunately,
here and representing Norfolk State University, Department of Psychology.
Yes.
And as I was talking, we want to discuss today a few things coming out of this pandemic and some of maybe the long-term effects it might have had on the African American community. We already went into the pandemic with some disparities. We were affected disproportionately by the pandemic, and at the same time, we had people that were kind of leery about and still leery about taking the vaccination. So, talk to us about. Well, let me start here first. Since you're in the school setting, I want to know how, what's so important to people on campus, students on campus, especially seniors in this past year, getting to your last year and not being able to spend it on campus and experience that campus life, especially at a HBCU. And then you had to do a lot of your teaching online. How did that go, and how did the students handle that?
So there were a lot of adjustments this past year. And the most significant of them, as you said, was in the delivery of our teaching. And we did two things. We did online teaching, completely online. And then we did remote teaching, where we would meet with the students during class time virtually. And we would not meet with them in person. As a psychology professor, I had my students do a lot of writing about how they were getting through the pandemic. And I found that the majority of them had significant stress. They wanted to be on campus, as you said, especially seniors. Many of them were afraid they were going to be denied the opportunity to walk across the stage for their commencement. So they had a lot of anxiety. They had a lot of depression. Many of them were living with family members that either were high risk, so it really mandated that they could not be as social as they wanted to be because they were afraid of the risk they would pose to parents and to grandparents. Many of them were in positions that, I'm sorry, as essential workers, that they had to go to work. And they were still trying to do this while managing a different way of learning. Norfolk State in particular is now fully open. As of June 21st, we opened. We are in summer school and the majority of those classes are online, but come fall, we will be completely back in the classroom. Our students are very excited about that, but of course you have to balance that with their feelings of invincibility and that things won't happen to them. So sometimes they put themselves at risk without understanding that they are putting themselves at risk. If you looked at the news, you'll see that it is that population that is the least vaccinated. And the reasons for that are numerous. However, it again poses a threat because they can be exposed to the virus and not have any protection against it.
Dr. Duncan, is Norfolk State going to require you come back vaccinated?
Excuse me, Thomas, you have two devices open. You need to close the one where you're not being seen because we're getting a lot of feedback.
Okay.
Close one, yeah.
Let's see here now. How's that?
Much better.
That's better.
Yes,
To answer
Dr. Duncan. Is North State going to require vaccinations for you to come back?
Not at this time. They are still in communication. We have a COVID center where they are now conducting surveys to see who is vaccinated among our staff, faculty, and students. But at this point, it is not required that we be vaccinated in order to return. If you are vaccinated, you can avoid some of the daily contacts. There is a COVID survey every morning asking about if you have been exposed, if you have a fever. You would not have to complete that survey daily if you were vaccinated. Of course, you would not be required to wear a mask, but that would be to the individual's discretion.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the nationwide. That's going to be the sticking point with the fighting on the virus, because you're leaving it up to folks on the honesty program, and you just can't be honest with a lot of these folks, especially out here Midwest and down south. Basically red states.
The faculty is very concerned. The average age of faculty at Norfolk State is about 58. So of course, there are many of us who are concerned in terms of our age about exposure. So they continue to discuss this. They are very active in terms of their meetings and they're sharing information with the community. I would not be surprised if by August, it would be required.
I know. Yeah.
Dr. Duncan, we discussed one time that many of the faculty or professors that are in the Department of Psychology are also clinical psychologists. And
Correct.
You can't play that dual role of being professor and really helps that the fact that most of you all are clinical psychologists. And I'm wondering how, college already can be a stressful situation for many students. And we talked about this in the past, being away from home. But, I'm just concerned about, well, not just the seniors, but, that's that one-time college experience that you get, and then not having to be able to be a part of the campus life, even for the day students. Did you have any students that were expressed concern or really had problems dealing with, not being on campus, especially their senior year? I know a lot of them might come to you all because of your position at the department.
Well, we did feel somewhat disengaged from our students. Again, through their writing, and also I made an attempt, as many faculty did, to reach out to our students more. So I did more phone calls, I did more meetings like this. We can do meetings within team. We did find that in particular, our seniors and our freshmen tended to have difficulty. Seniors for the obvious reasons of not being able to spend their last year on campus, but freshmen also because that is the time of the year, that is the time of their careers when we really try to engage them. So many students felt as though, many freshman students felt as though they were missing that opportunity to be a freshman, to be on campus, and to engage in a lot of the activities that were going on. I do have to say that our counseling center made extra efforts to be able to reach out to our students and also reach out and provide resources for our faculty. I was happy to say that I was allowed to develop a stress management series for faculty, because what I found was that a lot of the attention went to, and the research went to, student stress when faculty were as stressed, if not more stressed. Many of them having to adapt to online teaching, which many were not familiar with. There are many faculty, the research supports this, that really had some issues around their job security and whether or not they would be able to remain employed given the changes in education. So it's a high stress. It has been a high stress time for our students. Now, specifically in this area, I also experienced a good number of students who were stressed given some of the social unrest and the injustice. In fact, there were at least 2 of my students who withdrew in the spring semester because of the shooting incident down in Virginia Beach, where they knew some of the students who were, some of the individuals who were killed. They had affiliations to Norfolk State and they had affiliations to our students. And it was just so overwhelming for 2 of my students, at least, that they ended up having to withdraw.
Dr. Duncan, getting back to the fact of not requiring vaccinations and the fact that your faculty is primarily 55 or older, I know my daughter and my granddaughter is currently at an HBCU, and when the pandemic first began and they had one campus, Tommy, they had the students on campus, and even though that they put certain
Yes.
limitations in place, they found that the students,
Hold on, yeah,
Tommy,
just a minute. Tommy,
Yes.
I'm not hearing anything. We need to
put yours on mute, Tommy.
disconnect the.
I did.
We're getting a lot of
Say what?
Getting a lot of feedback.
It's from the radio. We can't really conduct the interview. And I'm listening to the radio. And I don't
Okay. Let me
Yeah, I just heard mute. So.
Yeah.
All right.
And
Okay,
even though they had certain guidelines in place, they found that many of the students were still congregating in large groups.
I got that.
And also, we're still getting some feedback from somewhere. Okay, many of the students were still congregating in large groups.
Feedback, Tom.
Got everything off.
And since we now are going back and not knowing who has been vaccinated, who has not been vaccinated on a trust basis, are we once again putting ourselves in a high-risk situation?
That's correct. And definitely as we're preparing to come back, those things are being considered. You know, in terms of cognitive and intellectual development, students in college are actually still considered adolescent. Adolescence ends at around 21, 22, 23. And with that comes a lot of adolescent thinking. There's the invincibility fable where students think nothing's going to happen to me, I'm going to be okay. They also are very egocentric, which means they think that everything revolves around them.
Exactly.
So given that, they put themselves many times at significant risk for many things, you know, substance abuse, driving recklessly, and now exposure to COVID. What has been most successful at institutions where students are back is frequent testing, as well as very strict, immediate consequences for those that don't obey the rules. So for example, if there is a party, that there be swift consequence for that, those students having to leave campus or maybe even being expelled. Schools that have come back have found that those two things seem to decrease risk or COVID, people getting COVID more than anything else. And that is frequent testing, as well as when the rules are broken, that those students be removed from campus.
But Dr. Duncan, what protocol are they putting in place also if students are tested positive for coronavirus and have to quarantine for 14 days? What are they putting in place for those students who may not be able to get back home because they're so far away from home?
Yes, there have been provisions made already where students are, there is a specific dorm where students who test positive have been placed, because we know that not all of our students can make it home, even if they test positive. And so there are living quarters for those students who have tested positive.
Dr. Duncan, it sounds like you all kind of anticipated, you know, certain issues, certain problems that might arise from this, and you all were prepared for it. And that's commendable. Really, thank you for that. Yeah, that took some of the stress off, you know,
Yes.
the students as well as the parents. Let's get into the communities now, the effects of the communities. And we talked about how it affected when we were going through the pandemic, and you know, kind of coming out of it, but we're not quite out of it. How do we deal with this in our communities to let people know they still have to be safe, even though, you know, we're getting all the go-aheads from the, you know, the different doctors and everything saying, okay, you can go out there if you're vaccinated, but you know, it's still a certain amount of precaution that needs to be taken, especially in our communities.
I would agree with you. And I think it boils down to individual responsibility. Mm-hmm. We have to really encourage people to be responsible for themselves, for the people that they love, and even for people that we don't know. The pandemic has caused us so many changes in our lifestyle and the way that we do things. When we talk about mental health, there's the obvious and the consistent anxiety and depression that goes with, and I'm sorry, my throat, I guess it's a Monday morning throat. And if I'm honest, my throat is not active at 6:30 in the morning. So anyway, I'm generally asleep. But I do apologize for that because I have a tickle in my throat. And so we see that people have increased anxiety, they have increased depression. And then there are two specific syndromes that they have named now as a result of us coming out of the pandemic. One of them is re-entry anxiety.
Yes.
And the other is cave syndrome. Mm-hmm. So I would like to talk with you a little about that. It seems like, Ms. Stiff, you're familiar with.
I'm familiar, yes.
The re-entry anxiety.
Cave,
and that is.
Cave syndrome, is that a clinical term?
Yes.
It is, they both are clinical terms that have come out of the pandemic. Re-entry anxiety has to do with the anxiety that some people are experiencing because now they are required, or they feel as though they are expected to be back into society.
Right.
And some people really are not ready for that.
Mhm.
They feel a great deal of anxiety when you think about being around other people. They have a great deal of anxiety when it comes to whether or not people are going to wear their mask, whether they're going to social distance. There is a great deal of anxiety in engaging in the everyday types of activities that we really took for granted. Going to the grocery store, going to a mall, going to church. We're familiar now. I saw on the news this morning that the Chrysler Center is opening back up with subscriptions. And so going to a theater, going to a concert, those are all things that to varying degrees, some individuals are having great anxiety, almost to the point of panic attacks
Right.
when having to go out in public. The other, which is more recently coined, is cave syndrome. And it is based on the idea that we have been in social isolation for approximately 18 months. And with that, people have a lot of anxiety about actually having to interact with people. So a little bit more than the reentry anxiety, but just people feel as though they've lost their ability to communicate effectively, to pick up those social cues and nuances that we used to pick up so easily. And people are feeling more comfortable staying in their isolated areas. And it's becoming debilitating.
And
Yeah,
also,
definitely one of those times we need to ignore the stigma in the African American communities concerning mental anguish, and make sure that especially couples, families, individuals seek that kind of help that's out there for everybody, and don't worry about whatever stigma you might have concerning it. This is one of those times, coming out of this, and I know a lot of couple relationships have suffered. Some have become closer. So, this is just one of those times we need to just take advantage of the help that's out there for people that might be suffering from some of the anxieties that were caused by the pandemic and the cave syndrome.
And it's so much easier now because there are many therapists who converted almost all 100% to telehealth. So you don't even have to leave your home and you can get your therapy. You can meet with your therapist. But you might notice that a lot of webinars, podcasts have addressed these issues of mental health. And that's been an attempt to be broad scale and to offer services in less of a stigmatized way. And that is, there's just information that comes across our computers and gives us insights. And the great thing about webinars, podcasts, and the like is that they allow people to see that they're not alone. There are many other people who are experiencing this pandemic just like you are.
And Dr. Duncan, there seems to be a rise in substance abuse since this pandemic has started. What coping skills can you give to those individuals who may be finding that they're having to use substances just to cope from day to day?
That is the $1 million question, Ms. Tiff, because as a coping strategy, people just tend to select the thing that seems to resolve their stress the easiest.
Right.
So when it's positive, there are those people who have gotten in the best shape of their lives.
Right.
They've used this time to exercise. They've used this time to be in meditation, use mindfulness. They have used this time to engage in substances. The treatment for that, the intervention for that is as varied as the individual. There are some people who at this point it works for them. And they're going to be very hard to try to inform them that something could be different or something could be better. It's typically not until family, friends, and maybe even the person themselves realizes that the substances and its use are interfering with their daily life. They either have a financial crisis, or they have a crisis with the family, they have a crisis with friends, and then they realize, I've got a problem. And when that's the case, we again try to get them the mental health help that they need, the support that they need. There are many things that they can do from on a group basis. We're all familiar with Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, and then there are more specialized groups. There is a group that operates in the Hampton Roads area called Operation Recovery. That recovery's in the name, and I'm sorry I don't remember it.
Okay.
But then again, there are treatment centers, Virginia Beach Psychological. There are places where people can go, sometimes needing to be isolated from home and that lifestyle so that they can get clean.
Yeah, I want to bring the Colonel in on this, Colonel, since we have a high concentration, and it gives the doctor a chance to regroup there. But Colonel, since we have a high concentration of military in this area, would you say that people in the military were more prepared for something like this because of some of the families might be used to isolation, especially when they go to a new place? So are people in the military, were they more prepared for this pandemic type of way of life and coming out of this, or probably suffering some of the same anxieties as everybody else?
No, I think folks in the military were affected just the same, but economically, they weren't hit because they were not laid off, because everybody is on they were going to get their check no matter what, twice a month or every month. So economically, they were not laid off unless you had a second job. So I don't think it would really hit them on the economic side, but there are anxieties, and it still is a readiness problem for those who are not vaccinated, because the commanders are talking about it. And so there is some disagreement and about mandating the vaccine, and everybody in the military is waiting on the FDA to get final approval. And then when that comes, then the vaccine will be mandated amongst the entire military. Right now, it is just voluntary. But if I was a commander there, I would be tracking my numbers, because we have to go to war. Then I can't take a bunch of non-vaccinated people with me to war. Because they put the mission at risk. And so I have to leave them at home. And then that's going to affect the readiness of the unit, and also my go-to-war ability. And future promotion ability.
Yeah.
And
so you have to think about that also.
Yeah, and you mentioned about the economic part of in the military, they weren't hurt, but it was a certain segment of our communities, the African American communities, that and they'll tell you that they came out quite well during the pandemic with the relief they got, and which could have been a help economically, but a hindrance psychologically. Because they thinking economically they're fine and psychologically they're okay, but they're not, because they still have to go through whatever situations they have to go through dealing with that pandemic. So that probably sort of complicated things as well, even though they were helped financially. But
that's a great point. But I think the pandemic for us, it was a good thing, because one, we had to withdraw, go in and lock down in the cave. And then within the cave, we weren't out there going to the restaurants, going to the nail shops, we wasn't doing all that. So all that excess income, disposable income that we were burning up went back into the household. Then you lump on if you could work at home, so your money was still coming in. Then you also had a few stimulus checks or this and that, and it gave us a chance to reassess, what do I need or what do I have to have?
That's if we came out of there lessons learned.
Yes,
And that would be my issue.
that's the
Yeah.
problem.
Are we coming out of this lesson? Are we coming out here so excited to be outside that anything that we should have learned, we
didn't.
haven't, especially with, with it still lingering over us, it still could get us. We still don't know everything about the COVID-19, and how effective long-term the vaccinations will be. You hear talk about boosters and things like that. So, that's my issue. How are we coming out of here with any lessons learned, on a larger scale?
Well,
And I would also, financially, I would also add, and this is kind of the piggyback to Ms. Stiff's question about coping strategies. There are many people who have developed an addiction to shopping.
Yes.
And they've got packages coming every day. Amazon is their best friend. They're doing a lot of online shopping. And so that's another thing that we're looking at in terms of post-COVID. How are people going to be managing with some of these strategies for coping that are not to their best advantage?
And Dr. Duncan, can you identify some of the, how do we recognize some of these stressful factors? What are some of these symptoms that we're experiencing that people may have and just don't realize that they're really stressed out?
It's really almost an opposite effect. One of the most common symptoms that we see is what's called anhedonia. It's a lack of pleasure in doing things. Those things that we used to enjoy doing, we don't find pleasure in them anymore. And with the pandemics, it's been kind of interesting because we don't know if the lack of interest has come from, as the Colonel says, not being able to engage in those things. I love to go to a restaurant and eat with my friends. I haven't been able to do that. So now I don't find pleasure in the thought of doing that anymore. So one of the symptoms we see is where people just have this general inertia. They're not active or motivated to do anything. And that can be symptomatic also of depression. We also see as a symptom of stress when people, and this is important for children, are irritable. Because children often can't articulate their feelings. They don't have the vocabulary to be able to say, I'm feeling tense, I'm feeling nervous, but they will be very irritable, or what we call labile. Just can't seem to get happy. They're snapping all the time. When we see this in adults, and this has been the problem with military that are home, families that are home together, we're very irritated with each other. We don't feel as though we have any alone time. The obvious, which I've talked about already, is the depression. People have a sad mood most of the time, most of the day. They are sad. They sleep a lot, but also the dysregulation in sleeping for depression can manifest itself in an insomnia. So it just depends on the individual. There are some who are depressed and they sleep a lot. There are some who are depressed and they don't sleep very much. We see dysregulation in eating, people who eat a lot, while there are other people when under this type of stress, they don't have an appetite. Some other symptoms that we see include almost a fear of doing things outside of the normal routine. There are some people who have become very regimented during this time. And if anything different happens, it throws them a curveball and they're very, very anxious. Those are the most obvious symptoms that we see. And in general, when you're looking at when psychological intervention is needed, I tend to use the rule of if it interferes with their daily ability to function.
Mhm.
Yeah. Dr. Duncan, you talked about the cave and the reentry anxiety piece, and we hear on the news about all the restaurants and all these jobs, and we see the help wanted signs out there that they're saying employees can't catch up with and can't get the employees to come back to work. Is that tied up in there?
Yes,
Now
it is.
I've been home. I don't want to go back there and put
Mhm.
myself at risk. Or I don't
Yeah,
want to go back to that minimum wage job.
very good. It is exactly tied with that. As we were discussing earlier, there are people who made more money, income,
That's right.
during the pandemic with the relief and the stimulus than they could ever make at work. And so for them, they have determined that it is more beneficial for them to stay home and collect unemployment than it is to go back to work. And we understand that, and I believe that legislation is going to change such that we can increase the minimum wage.
Mhm.
So because people don't want to come back to jobs where they haven't been able to sustain. So hopefully some changes with that will occur. There are also people, and I talk a lot about this because of my students, who live with people who are elderly or who have some increased vulnerability. And they are concerned about returning to work and putting themselves at risk of COVID, and then coming to the places where they live and putting other people at risk. Elderly parents, children who may have, who right at this point still can't get vaccinated, right? So there are a lot of concerns in addition to the reentry anxiety, as well as the cave syndrome, that make people very reticent to go back to work.
But Dr. Duncan, I got one point that you talked about the legislation for the minimum wage. That is not going to happen across the country because of the Republican Party, and I got to call it out now. They do not want to help their workers or anybody, and it'll go against employees. So it's not going to happen. So if you want to get to a $15 minimum wage, you need to register to vote and also go to vote. And we're having the midterms come up, which is a low turnout situation across the country historically, and that's where Republicans have an advantage there because they show up. And for everything that we've gotten, it's going to be turned back if they take over the House, Senate, and all the down ballot spots across the country. And so stay home, and we're going to be in trouble. I just had to add that political commentary there.
No, I agree with you 100%. And there are many who will not agree with this, but I'm going to take this to another place. And that is when we talk about generational trauma or slave syndrome, it is not a coincidence that so many of the behaviors and the actions that we find difficult to engage in come from a history of that being denied us or even punishable to us. And I think about two things in particular this morning. One of them is literacy and also our engagement with voting. And there are many who believe that it is because of the ways in which people of color, Black Americans, have been treated as it relates to particular issues, that it is almost culturally ingrained in us from generation to generation to engage in the same kinds of behavior. We were denied, we were killed for trying to vote. We were denied, we were killed for being able to read. And so I think further study needs to happen to look at what are the connections, because it only makes sense. It is only logical that we should vote, but yet we don't. And how can you explain that? I believe it has something to do with generational trauma.
Yes.
Wow, Ernestine, and it's always so important. And thank you, Colonel, for being, our political person, always bringing in the political part because it's everything around us. So it needs to be included in just about everything we talk about. But, something interesting happened this weekend, Dr. Duncan, and all of us were at this event this weekend, uh, dedicating a park to a well-loved citizen of the city of Portsmouth in his neighborhood. And what I noticed there, as we talk about people being leery about going back to work or trying to be careful about COVID, it was a lot of us there. Very few of us had masks on. We were there in all different ages. And I had my mask, but I didn't have it up. And I'm thinking that maybe we feel comfortable around each other as an African-American community because we were shaking hands, hugging.
Yes, we were. We were hugging.
Like it was no COVID at all. And it was most of us. And I was wondering, I would like to see that same scenario in a different setting and see if we would act differently. But, do you think it's because we are more trusting of each other in our own communities that kind of setting that we were in, we just felt comfortable, being just like it was COVID never happened?
I think that there's a part of that that does fit, but there are also individuals who are very suspect. And so they don't trust others. But I think what's happening now is that we've been a year and more without much social interaction, except for those who are in our home. And then when we have interacted in a larger way, it's been virtual. And human beings are social beings. We are created to be social. So many of us have been craving this for a long time.
Yes.
And now that we're able to get back out, we're happy to see each other. We want to engage with each other. We want to touch because so many of us have been denied a hug. So many of us have been denied a handshake, just physical contact with each other, which is one of the reasons why we have seen so many cases of dementia out of the pandemic. Older people have had less sensory stimulation, and it has caused some very clear decreases in their mental ability. So I think that many of us are hungry for that, and we want to get back to that. We may be a little bit overzealous in that by not protecting ourselves. The recommendations still are that we wear our masks, we social distance as much as possible. Although, the CDC has said you don't have to. You don't have to do those things if you are fully vaccinated. And so I will leave it at that. I think that we're hungry for that. But I do think that there are some people, again, those people with the re-entry anxiety, those people with the cave syndrome, they're not going to be out there.
Look, amazingly enough, I was on a train last night, and we were told you must wear your mask. They said we will warn you twice, and the third time you will not arrive at your destination. So that has been put in place on public transportation.
Yes.
But like you said, we become a little lax when we get among family and friends. But as Jane says, around certain individuals, I make sure that I have my mask on, even though I know I need to wear it at all times. Because those who I know who have been vaccinated. And two, and that's kind of hard to tell too, because people would tell you that they've been vaccinated when they have not been vaccinated.
Exactly. Exactly.
It still puts you at risk. And having gotten the vaccine, we can still get COVID, but just not as bad as those who are not vaccinated. And we become asymptomatic. And then we, in turn, can infect someone else.
I remember a saying that my teachers used to tell me, and that was, to thine own self be true.
Yes.
And so what that means for me is that I have continued to wear a mask. I continue to social distance because for me, the risk is too great of how I will feel if I contract COVID, knowing that I could have protected myself or I could put someone else at risk. And I know this is a generalization, but there have been many people who've been resistant to wear the mask this whole time. There are people who have lived very privileged lives and feel as though wearing a mask is an imposition to their civil rights.
Exactly.
That has not been the case so much for people of color. We'll wear the, if they wear the mask, we'll wear the mask. But those very same people have the mentality that you speak of, Ms. Stith, and that is that they will be dishonest in an attempt not to have what they think are their civil rights infringed upon. And you don't know who those people are. And so you have to protect yourself against them.
Exactly.
You know what? And you're talking about protecting yourself, and down the road, and I'm making a prediction, you were already talking about the Delta variant, and now there is a Delta plus variant. And so as these other countries do not get vaccinated in the rates that the United States are, and we don't vaccinate ourselves at the rate that we're going to do, there's going to be another variant out there that's going to set us back to square one. And we'll have to start off with another vaccine to get us out of this hole. And so we're going to go back to square one just because folks won't stop, look, and listen, as they say, walking across the street. And I would tell you one thing that when we talk about the mask for Black people, prior to the
don't go there, Colonel.
okay all right.
Go ahead.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Colonel.
Okay, prior to the pandemic, if you were Black and you wore a mask, the cops was gonna shoot you down. Now we can wear a mask and we don't want to.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can attest to that because going through my situation, I had to wear a mask when nobody else was, and the looks I would get when I would walk into a public place with my mask on, I guess, especially walking into a bank. It was like, here it comes.
Yeah.
But I was trying to protect myself from anybody around me, but that changed. But before we before we go, Dr. Duncan, and I just wanted to briefly hit on this, and hopefully it will lead into another conversation with you where this subject can be the main topic. It's concerning what we're seeing in all the cities and concentrated here in the Hampton Roads cities, particularly Portsmouth. The rise in the violent crimes in our youth. And I know, and we have places like Norfolk State and ODU that have psychology departments. And I know you all study human behavior, and you all have data that you have compiled, looking at the behaviors of the youth and families in general, and trying to figure out where do we start, or how do we collectively deal with this? And it has to be a collective thing. But, often the cities don't, in my opinion, we should start with places like Norfolk State that have those departments and that data and studying that, or could be asked to study that and start there and then put that information together and then have a collective effort. What do you feel? How do you feel? I mean, looking at that, where is this? It's always been around us, but seems like it's really a rise in. I guess I don't know if it's because social media is showing most of it, or what. But I think it's a rise, especially with our young folks.
It is a rise, and it is a rise across the lifespan. If you've been watching the news lately, you see that on airplanes, they have had an increase in abuse towards the stewards and the stewardess. At pro games, athletic games, they have been taunting and provoking the players. And it's been so abusive that people are actually getting arrested. So as a society, I think this year has made us more and more agitated and irritated with each other. People are frustrated. And so they are taking it out on places where they haven't been, but now they are. So we're seeing an increase in aggression. We're seeing an increase in violence across the lifespan. And it only makes sense that when that is modeled for our youth, when that's modeled for children, we've seen increases in domestic violence. So not only are they seeing the increase in this aggression and this violence on social media, they're sometimes seeing it in their home, and it is modeled for them. And so they then repeat what they see. So we have seen an increase in this society-wise. We've seen it in adults. We've seen it in youth. We've actually seen it in children. And sometimes when it's perpetrated against children, it becomes a suicide attempt because that aggression is then turned inward. So we've seen increases in suicidality, suicide attempts, and we've seen increases in this violence across the 7 cities. People are frustrated. They don't have appropriate means for venting or for getting their negative emotions out. And as such, they feel negative when they're with other people. There have been increases in bullying, whether it be cyberbullying or whether it be bullying in person. And there is a status and a reinforcement in our society today for being a bully. And people who say they don't want to take it anymore will retaliate now. My generation, we used to meet you outside at 3 o'clock and we'd fight. Today, they meet you outside and they've got guns, they've got knives, they've got generational. You know, I've heard of fights on high school campuses where the mothers get involved. So the kids are fighting and then the moms are fighting.
That's right.
And it is just a society now in which that kind of behavior is celebrated. So I think part of it is what we see, but another part of it is that there are not the kinds of consequences that used to be in place for that type of action and behavior.
And you know, and Dr. Duncan, it doesn't seem to be a fear of letting folks know that they're engaging in these activities, because you can go on Facebook Live now, Facebook, and see the young people with the guns and the money and throwing the signs. And there's no fear in letting you know that I'm a part of this. You know, this is my group. These are my homies, you know, and they show it. They show it on a daily basis.
There is some very compelling and interesting research on that as a form of passive suicide behavior. And they see it particularly with African-American males, that they will flaunt that type of behavior and that type of action. Some hypothesize in an attempt for someone else to take their life, that it comes out of a depression where they don't feel like they have viable, realistic options.
Exactly.
And I think often of when I was practicing and I was seeing a young man, maybe about 14 years old, who was a drug runner. And I asked him, didn't he feel an increased risk that he would be killed one night, you know, trying to move drugs from one place to the other? Didn't he feel like that was an occupation that would put him at increased risk? And almost immediately, as though it was no thought involved, he said, well, don't you sometimes worry if this roof is going to fall in on your head?
Wow.
And so for him, it was just as real that my risk of work and the ceiling falling in on me and crushing me was the same as him being engaged in some type of drug activity and being shot and killed. It just seemed reasonable to him.
Wow.
And that type of thinking is very hard to overcome.
And Dr. Duncan, you know, I was talking to a young man who had on a shirt a few years ago, and the shirt said, "Shoot me because I'm already dead." And
Wow.
when I asked him about that, I said, "Why would you wear?" I said, "You need to be careful of the words that you put on your body, what you're putting out into the universe." He said, "Well, Miss Leah," he said, "I don't like me. It's easy for me to shoot someone who looks like me because I don't like me, and so therefore I can shoot that person who looks like me, and I have no regrets for it." This kid was like 13 or 14 years old, and these were the thoughts that he had. You know, no thoughts of longevity. I'm already at the point of death. I'm not going to make it to 21. I'm not going to make it to 25. So it really doesn't make any difference.
It doesn't make any difference. And there was probably little joy in his life
Right.
that made him want to remain here.
Mhm.
And that is just such a sad situation that we find many of our youth are experiencing. And it's out of that frustration, Mr. Overton, that I believe they become increasingly aggressive and violent against each other.
Mm.
But you know what? That's their reality at the time, and that's what they think. And sometimes you're talking about that 13-year-old, or he can't see 5, 10 years down the road. And that one interaction with the police, that he gets a record, that his life will be over, basically, because it affects student loans. So you can't go to school, can't get a security clearance, da 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 da. So now I'm stuck in that perpetual toilet and just waiting to be flushed down. And so
Exactly.
I have no life. And so I got to stay on that track. And then I'm role modeled by, the pimp or the drug dealer down the street that's got the old BMW, don't have a new BMW, got the old
You got a
BMW.
BMW.
Yeah. And don't got a pot and piss in, just waiting on to be caught. And I always tell the youth is one thing with getting old now, you'll never see a retired drug dealer. They're all in the cemetery.
That's right.
They're either in jail or at the cemetery.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm,
where do you want to be?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That boils it down to it right then.
Agreed.
Yes.
Well, as we come to a close, and that's why I like to bring Dr. Duncan on, because I hope people watch it, because I saw the last city council talk about, Portsmouth City Council talk about they meeting with certain players, and I hope one of the players that are in those meetings with them is somebody with a psychology background or
Exactly.
somebody that studies human behavior. It's so easy for us to assume as laymen what's going on in somebody's mind, but people that study this should be at the forefront of trying to figure out what we need to do. And
Exactly.
I hope that, and like I always say, we have these universities, we have HBCUs and the other universities here that have these departments, that you don't have to bring in people from Ohio to study what's going on in Hampton Roads and pay them
Exactly.
$200,000. Now, give these HBCUs some money for their work, but also, students can be involved, and it's a part of
Yes.
what they do.
Mhm.
And I hope that this kind of message gets to the people that it needs to get to, because we're going to keep spinning our wheels if we try to figure this out ourselves without the
That's true.
professionalism of people who study human behavior.
I
And
appreciate that support and that acknowledgement. Clearly the Department of Psychology, but also our departments, our School of Social Work
Yeah.
and our Department of Sociology
Mhm.
engages in a lot of community-based research, and great and talented faculty there and students who want to know. And so we stand ready and willing and able to be able to conduct that research.
And Dr. Duncan, you also conduct programs in our church, Grove Church, as well as programs that have been on Norfolk State campus concerning this, with panels dealing with that. So it's not like it's nothing new that you all are not dealing with, but in these cities, it can take it to another level if they just pay attention to where the resources are.
Yes. And that's why I'm glad now to see, and it's almost a double-edged sword. I'm excited to see the attention to mental health and the validation of mental health now. But it comes from such a deep need. People didn't pay attention to it before, but now people are dying. People are abusing substances, and it's all related to our mental health. So I'm glad to see that we are finally giving it its due.
Yes, because we say certain segments of society have always acknowledged that they get help for the simplest things. You know, they're not going to let the first signs of depression go untreated without going to see their shrink, per se.
Mhm.
You know, and those signs of depression can be so subtle that we wave it off, but could turn into a much larger problem.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think there are also some other issues, and I know that the time is ending, but there are not a lot of people of color. There are not a lot of Blacks who are in mental health.
Mhm.
And sometimes we want to see somebody, or we can relate better to someone who looks like us.
Mhm.
It's one of the main reasons why I remain at Norfolk State, because we're hoping to train a cadre of students who look like the people that come to see them. In essence, less than 1%, 4% of all psychologists in this country are African American.
And not taking anything from other professionals, from other cultures, but sometimes it helps to sit across from someone that you know might have experienced some of the things you experienced firsthand.
Very true.
Yes.
Very true.
Okay, as we come to a close, we can wind up if any of the hosts have any closing remarks, and then Dr. Duncan, if you have any closing remarks. And like I said, you have to come back and we can dedicate a whole show to dealing with the crime and whatever else that we need to talk about it as far as getting to the roots of it. Because we've had Dr. Bruce Copeland on from the social work of Norfolk
Yes.
State. You know, he's an
Yes.
adjunct professor there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm getting some questions as to my ghostly appearance. I am out of town. I do not have my green screen. And because I came on James' Zoom invite, I cannot turn my green screen off. So for those of you who are asking, that's why I'm ghostly. And hopefully I can correct this by the time we come on next Monday. But Dr. Duncan, I want to thank you so very much. And there's so many more questions that I had because this mental health issue has become a crisis. Suicide has become a major crisis in our community. And we need to talk about it more. So that people will feel comfortable reaching out to get help. Especially during this time, this pandemic season. And for the little ones, we need to get some mental health for our little kids, because we have little kids, 3, 4, and 5 years old, who are acting up and acting out. And if we don't address those issues now, then they too may end up being like some of the children who are out here who feel that they are already dead. So I want to thank you so very much. And my last comment is that I'm in a house that does not drink coffee. I'm about to die this morning. I'm going to have to find the nearest Wawa so I can get me a cup of coffee. But guys, thank you so very much. And one last thing, it was so good being out at the Mount Hermon renaming on last Saturday. I didn't see Chapman. Colonel,
I don't know how you all missed each other.
I missed you.
I was there.
I know, but it was a grand affair, and Mount Hermon outdid themselves. They came out and they showed up. So we want to congratulate the citizens of the Mount Hermon community as well. But thanks again, Dr. Duncan. I appreciate you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Dr. Duncan, first, I thank you for coming on once again. You know, you've enlightened the world with your knowledge and all your experience. And then, but I'd like to tell your daughter and yourself, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I'm glad she's gone back to Atlanta, because I love
you
Atlanta.
Are, I was there. You are glad she went back to Atlanta?
Yes. I know it hurts to your heart that I say this.
Yeah.
But you know, I'm also a Georgia State alumnus too, so I know where she's
know.
going back to. So
Yeah.
she'll do well down there.
Thank you so very much. I'm very proud of her. And it was time for her to go. So
Yes.
as much as it broke my heart, it's her time.
Yes.
And she's done well. So thank you so much for that. And thank you all for this opportunity. I feel that it is my responsibility to talk about these issues that affect us on an everyday basis. You know, when we talk about mental health, when we talk about psychology, psychology is the study of mental processes and behavior. Therefore, there is no human activity that does not involve psychology and mental health. And the more we know about it, the better we'll be. So I thank you, Portsmouth Coffee Talk, for affording me this opportunity. And whenever you would want me to speak with you again, I would welcome the opportunity. So thank each of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You see, host, why I used to have her on every month.
I can understand.
And one last thing, I'll say this about my granddaughter. You know, we always have to talk about our grandkids, but Zuri, my daughter Jamie was worried about, she's just 3 and she turned, 3 this year. And she was worried about her social skills, her building of her social skills. She hadn't been around kids her age. So when things opened up, she got her in this day camp. And it didn't take but 5 minutes for her to, because they were concerned about how she would react around other kids. 5 minutes and she was into
Social
it.
butterfly. She's a social butterfly.
Social skills, they were better than ours. So at 3 years old.
Resilient,
That's
resilient.
important. You to make sure your children have those social skills or learn those social skills early.
Mm-hmm.
Safely. Well, again, thank you, Dr. Duncan. We appreciate it. And thank you for getting up early. I know you're not an early riser, but we couldn't tell.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you again.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And Leah, she's with us from Maryland today.
Maryland right now.
She's so far away.
Tomorrow,
That's why.
tomorrow,
tomorrow she'll
Mexico, Cabo,
Mexico.
on its way.
Good for you.
Yeah. Yes, enjoy yourself. And
Thank
you see, she's awake from us, but she's still here.
With us, yeah.
Thank you, Colonel. Appreciate you, buddy.
Yes. Thank you.
All right, you all have a great day and a great week.
Our voice.
Oh, and Talk is here to represent our voice,
Our community.
And our future.
See, Leah's there shaking her head so much she forgot to say her part.
I said our community.
Yeah, you were kind of late with it, though.
Only I
good.
reminded you, okay?
Yes.
Yes, I appreciate that. Thank you, dear. I appreciate it.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
everybody.
again, Dr. Duncan. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Thank you. And have a great time away.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so I will end
Shut her
it.
down.
Okay, all right. Good morning, everyone. Every day we rise is a great day to be alive. And welcome.